I feel we share a common core belief, a belief that there is no problem, great or small, that humanity faces or will ever face that we cannot overcome together through our combined will and sheer human ingenuity. And I know it's a commonly held belief because I see it constantly portrayed in popular culture. A devastating asteroid might have come hurtling from the heavens and lay low the mighty dinosaur, but if it came to humanity, well, we just grab Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck and throw them in a pair of space shuttles, some drilling equipment, a pair of nukes, and a killer Aerosmith soundtrack, and boom, get it done. Like easy peasy, lemon squeezy, right? So when we wonder why in reality the world is so beset with problems and we have an immeasurable amount of information available to all of us at the click of a button, the conclusion we must tend to draw is it must be a failure of will. We just don't care enough. And while human apathy is to an extent a natural conclusion to draw, I think it's dangerously misplaced. You see, I think we genuinely, passionately want to solve the problems, but we can't bring our collective will to bear on the solution because we can't agree on what the solution is. A situation that's getting exponentially worse as the experts who genuinely understand what needs to be done seem to be suffering from an ever-increasing inability to persuade mainstream society that they do in fact hold the keys. And to my way of thinking, this is actually the greatest crisis that humanity faces. Now, you might find that a surprising statement. Surely it's war or famine or poverty or social inequity or the rising tide of bigotry and hatred that seems to be sweeping across the face of the earth. But those things have solutions. Things like war are essentially an expression of a collective will, a negative will, but a collective will nonetheless. So unless we address the fundamental dysfunction in how we solve problems, the solutions to all those kinds of issues will continue to slide maddeningly through our fingers. And so, as I look at this spiral into the death of persuasion and I see this rising tide of hysteria that seems to be creeping into public debate and international politics, it seems to me that now more than ever, our ability to understand how to bring about a focused, collective, positive will against the challenges that face us is more vital than ever. Now, I have a vested interest in this. I work in creating a public, positive dialogue around immigration and multiculturalism. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the movement of humanity across the borders of nations is kind of a touchy subject right about now. And when I first was involved with the field, it was natural to conclude that the reason that immigration was so contentious was because it was so misunderstood. So the solution I was given was go out and present them with the facts. Well, the passion with which I presented these facts was only equaled by their staggering and distressing inability to significantly change public opinion. Now, I was fortunate enough to come across a wonderfully insightful TED Talk entitled On Being Wrong by a brilliant woman called Catherine Schultz. And since it really helped me understand the struggles I was having, what I'd like to do is walk through the steps that Schultz outlines as to why we have so much trouble changing people's minds, but apply them specifically to my field of public policy. So, in order to avoid muddying the waters, since a lot of public debate is around subjective areas, what I'd like to do today is focus on an area that is purely objective and relies on fact above all else, specifically the scientist. So, I'd like you to imagine that we are scientists. And we've looked through the ruthlessly peer-reviewed research that's been done by a wide range of highly accredited, independent institutions, and the result of that, we've come to certain conclusions. We've decided that vaccines are overwhelmingly safe and that they help protect millions of lives, or maybe it's that GMOs are not only better for human health, but they're better for the ecosystem since they dramatically reduce the amount of pesticides that farmers are then washing out into the ecosystem, or maybe that it's the Earth is going through a period of human-driven climate change, or that it's round, or that it's more than 10,000 years old, or that evolution is real, etc., etc., etc. So, I now meet somebody who has a different point of view on some or all of these topics. And at this point, what Schultz outlines is that my first conclusion is they must have misunderstood the facts or not had them in the first place, because if they had the facts, surely they would have come to the same conclusion that I had. And yet, when I present them with the exact same facts that persuaded me, they say, well, that's your opinion. But I think that vaccines cause autism and GMOs are frankenfoods that are destroying and killing the bees, and that evolution is just a theory because if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? And that's my opinion, and I'm entitled to it. And it seems to me that at this point, logic-based people tend to get caught in kind of a logic loop. Because having been persuaded by facts themselves, they can't get around the idea that the same facts aren't persuading the person that they're talking to. And so they go and get more facts to bolster their point of view, only to find out that this seems to be further entrenching the other person in the opposite point of view. And in defiance of the well-known axiom that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result, they go out and do more research and present more facts. It's like watching a pigeon fly into a window that it just can't seem to accept is actually there. Because what they can't seem to understand in this kind of argument is when it comes to that kind of public persuasion, that facts don't matter. And as a fact-oriented person, this is a very difficult gut concept to get around. Now, remember, you may have had a different opinion on some or all of those topics, but a big part of your scientific training is if you are presented with credible scientific evidence that's at odds with your personal opinions, then you change your mind. And so now we arrive at this point of frustration. And we see fact-based people, scientists, logic people going just really moving the dialogue away from a reasoned discussion around ideas to attacking the people and their mental abilities. And this is actually a constant thing that we've seen throughout the ages. The most brilliant minds that we know are constantly having this struggle with people not accepting their point of view. And the most dangerous thing is that's the second stage we arrive at, is we just conclude that they're idiots. And in fact, because of this, we start to demonize the opinion and the people and whether or not they're intelligent at all. And the worst thing is, this brings us to the third stage that Schultz outlines, because you have to remember the other person is going through exactly the same process you are, but now that they know that you have the facts, and not only are you not an idiot, but you're actually quite well educated in this field, in fact, you're an expert, the final conclusion that they draw is, you know what the real truth is. But you're manipulating it for some nefarious end. You're a corporate shill for Big Pharma. And we reach this impasse where we look at each other, we throw up our hands, and we want to go and find somebody else who we agree with because that's much easier. And this is where we misstep. Because public engagement is everything. And oddly enough, one of the quotes that really summarizes this misstep comes from one of my favorite people in the world, the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson. The only guy I know with a brain the size of a planet that can still pull off a photo shoot like he's modeling for the front of a 1970s disco album, right? Now, he quite correctly points out that the good thing about science is it's true whether or not you believe in it. However, I feel this really reflects the tendency for scientists, having spent so long learning to put their own opinions aside, to rather rudely dismiss the opinions of people that they don't agree with. But wrong opinions matter too. While science doesn't care about your opinion, scientists should. Because public opinion drives public policy, which in turn drives public funding for the scientists, which we've seen dramatically slashed recently, and whether or not the general community engages in scientifically sound practices around health and agriculture and everything else. They say that those who ignore the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. So Neil, the one thing that history has taught us is that if you are a brilliant scientist and you have irrefutable proof that the world is teetering on the edge of catastrophe, but you can't get anybody to listen, the only solution that you have at that point is to take your infant son, put them in a rocket, send them to another planet, and hope that they develop superpowers and eventually meet Wonder Woman, Batman, and go on to form the Justice League. Fortunately, it doesn't have to quite come to that. As it happens, understanding why people change their minds, and more importantly, why they don't change their minds, is actually a well-studied field. So Previously, for example, I mentioned Catherine Schulz. And when she's talking about cognitive dissonance, which is our tendency to hold on to an idea, even when we've been presented with opposite opinions, she has a rather wonderful analogy. She points out that being wrong and being right, the reason we hold on to that feeling of being right is because it feels awesome. And being wrong makes us feel stupid and embarrassed. She also quite insightfully points out that it's not being wrong that feels bad, it's realizing that you're wrong. Because up until that point, feeling wrong felt like being right. And she uses a wonderful analogy of the Wile E. Coyote chasing the ever-elusive roadrunner off the cliff, and there's that period where he's still going because he doesn't realize that he can't. But then you see that expression on his face, and he does this with the toe. There's that little uh-oh sign that comes up. But he still won't look down because he realizes when he looks down, that's when he'll have to acknowledge that he's standing on nothing but thin air, and it's only then that he'll fall, and that's when the pain comes. We also get a lot of insight from things like the 1979 Stanford study on capital punishment, where they found that when they had people and presented them with ideas that were at odds with whether or not they were for and against capital punishment, at the end of it, they were more convinced than ever by the opposite argument that their original position was right. We can also get insight from things like the Dunning-Kruger effect, or as I like to call it, the drunken dancing effect. You know how when you're at a party, you are the best dancer at the party? Well, you don't know that you're dancing badly because you're drunk. But that's also why you're dancing badly. And they found out for perfectly sober people, this is actually a permanent position. Because people who are bad at things like interpersonal relationships or humor or logic are bad at those things because they don't understand what being good at those things look like. Which is also stops them self-assessing and realizing that they're not good at those things, which is why we all have a friend who is convinced he's like the funniest person in the room when we all keep telling him that he's not. A similar study was done in Yale, where they showed that they had a bunch of graduate students and they got them to analyze their understanding and rate their understanding of some common everyday items like a zipper or a toilet, etc. And the students essentially shrugged and said, well, sure, we understand how those things work. But then they got the students to write a detailed step-by-step explanation of exactly how those things worked. And afterwards, the students were forced to conclude that they didn't actually know much about them at all. They knew how to use them, but they didn't actually understand how they worked. And this knowledge illusion gives us a wildly displaced idea of how well we understand things. Now, all this combines to have a devastating effect on public policy. The Dunning-Kruger effect and the knowledge illusion makes us feel like we can have meaningfully input on fields that are completely outside of our areas of expertise, from global climatology to molecular biology. And then, cognitive dissonance and this confirmation bias where we'll go and choose the evidence that we like that supports our point of view will make sure that we hold on to it for dear life. Now, all this means that we have to fundamentally rethink the way that we go about persuading people. These are hardwired emotional responses that you can't just logic away or browbeat out of somebody. I've been fortunate enough to suffer from a certain amount of occupational and geographical drift over the course of my life, starting as a lawyer in Australia and now working in public relations here in Canada. And as a result, I've come to a bit of an understanding about the difference between an adversarial argument and a persuasive one. Law is adversarial. I take my point of view, you take your point of view, and then basically we try to destroy each other's arguments. I'm also trying to show that I'm the smartest person in the room, but that's not the point. The point is that it's for a third person who's listening to us that we're trying to convince. However, even if there is no third person, we'll still take this same approach and then wonder why it fails. Persuasive arguments work on the assumption that I have to understand and address the emotions that's driving them to believe this. People aren't against vaccinations because they're idiots. They're against vaccinations because they're scared for the children. And because they've been so effective in terms of preventing disease, they've probably never seen someone who's suffered from polio and been crippled or had a child die from measles or tuberculosis. So those aren't real fears. And tonight I've been focusing on science because that's the stuff where the science is in. There is no debate. We're good. And there's still this much controversy. So things like my field of immigration and other fields, we have to understand that in order to be persuasive in our field, we have to get past the type of argument that we're having and move to a point where we understand the difference between arguing to win and arguing to win people over. Thank you.